Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the thunderous applause. I don't think I've done anything to deserve it yet. I want to start off by talking a little bit about what the issue is, and then we have amazing panelists whom we will speak with. So right now, the Global South is at the center of a massive shift that's happening. By 2023, 84% of all additional global meat production will come from developing regions like Asia, Africa, and Latin America. With the majority of current consumption sitting in the world's developed countries already, it is clear that the way we produce and consume animals is not a regional issue, it's a global issue. And it's a global issue with significant implications, not just for billions of animals today and in the next 20 years to come, but also for environmental and human health. So how can we ensure that the future of animal welfare not only includes the Global South as it does right now, but prioritizes it in some way? How can we leverage the unique cultural values in our advocacy that can help create lasting change in these regions? How do we build international alliances, and how do we learn from our international allies to accelerate work in the Global South? And very importantly, what is the role that philanthropies can play in kickstarting these global initiatives and really giving us a head start? So tackling these questions and more, our panel today features voices who have first-hand experience in addressing these challenges. We have with us Karthik, who is the Managing Director of Fish Welfare Initiative. He is a PhD scholar and has previously managed the Animal Law Center, where he focused on unethical egg production. Before moving to animal welfare, Karthik gained 4 years of experience in agriculture and livelihoods, working with NGOs and different members of parliament. He's deeply committed to ending animal and human suffering and believes in the efficacy of bottom-up approaches. We also have with us Lucia, who is a vegan and animal advocate for nearly a decade, who brings with her a blend of IT and marketing expertise in her role as Impact and Strategy Director at Sinergia Animal. With a history in campaigns and having overseen teams in Latin America and Asia, Lucia now guides local directors in achieving impactful goals across the Global South. We also have with us Aliya, a member of Ömir, which literally translates to life in Kazakh. This is an animal rights organization and a vegan movement in Kazakhstan. And together with other like-minded activists, she organizes vegan festivals and animal rights conferences in this Central Asian country. She is an ecologist and a historian, with her doctoral dissertation talking about the transition of Soviet Kazakh farming from extensive to now intensive modes of production. She's also an editor at a media outlet targeting eco and climate activists and moderates the largest vegan Telegram chat in Central Asia. Last, but certainly not the least, we have Seb Alex. Born and raised in Lebanon, Seb Alex is the founder of the Middle East Vegan Society, a nonprofit organization concentrating on the growth of veganism in the Middle East and North Africa using educational means and corporate outreach. Seb has given the animal advocacy movement a lot of workshops to over 1,300 plus activists across North America, Europe, Middle East, and Australia, and has helped launch the world's first animal rights and vegan support center, and has published the free ebook, When Animal Rights and Logic Meet, in 20 different languages. As we go into this panel, I'd like to remind everyone that English is not the native language of everyone present in this room. So let us be patient and kind and take that into consideration, especially in the questions that we want to ask. And with that, I will pass it over to the panel for opening statements. So over to you, Karthik.
Hello, everybody. I have begun my work in the animal movement to conceptualize how an effective way for mass appreciation of the problem of battery cages could be formed, both through academic work and through engagement with media. It was very clear to us that we needed to build a coalition with other movements that have been around for a long time. So we tried to produce a paper that focused on, building the connection between labor rights and battery cages, building a connection between environmental issues and battery cages. And, that I think would have been really effective. Unfortunately, this work couldn't see fruition, but I think that is the kind of spirit we need to bring to the table they're real opportunities that might not seem very clear right now because a lot of work has not been done to figure out what these approaches can be. But I think that's where we need to begin, and I think we'll have a lot of conversations today about that. It should already be.
But you just want to give yours.
Yeah. My name is Aliya, and I come from Kazakhstan. For those unfamiliar, Kazakhstan is the 9th largest country in the world by land area, though not in terms of population. We are only 20 million people there, a little bit more than half of Poland's population. Geographically, Kazakhstan sits between, and don't get too excited, China and Russia. We share the world's largest continuous land border with Russia. As a post-Soviet country, we face still economical challenges, largely due to high levels of corruption. However, we are better off than many other post-Soviet countries, and not because we are especially awesome, just because our awesome reserves of oil and other natural resources. And throughout the panel, I'll share more about Kazakhstan and our plant-based prospects, and I will discuss further how being the only vegan at this conference and other international conferences and events like this sometimes leads to a misrepresentation of my home country that is often seen having a meat-heavy culture. Over to you.
Okay. Hi everyone, thank you for coming. And yeah, my name is Seb. We work in the Middle East, mostly with Middle East Vegan Society, and this was something that we started a few years ago because I'm born and raised in Lebanon. I'm not living there now, but I always thought, why isn't anyone doing anything large scale there? And with time I realized maybe I can be that person instead of waiting for someone else. And the team has grown now, and we're around 13 people, volunteers and people working full-time as well. And one of the main reasons we wanted to do this is because we realized there's barely any importance being given to this part of the world. And when it comes to population, it might not be the biggest part of the world or the most important one, but when it comes to population growth, it is the most important one. Another factor is the religion of Islam being the very predominant religion in the area. And the world Muslim population is set to pass the Christian population in a few decades, which makes me realize if the animal rights movement doesn't try to raise awareness and make a link between veganism and Islam, then in the future it's going to be very difficult and it's going to be too late. So we're doing this work there. We're using corporate outreach, working with the ministries of health in Saudi Arabia to change the dietary guidelines and other types of thing. And to our surprise, most of the countries, their governments in the countries, I mean, they're quite open to it. And not only are they open to it, they very often take steps towards plant-based futures or plant predominant futures without anyone pushing them to do so. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this panel and everything we're gonna share. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you for being here. It's been an honor to be invited to share some of our experiences in Southeast Asia and Latin America, and also learn from the other panelists who are also interesting. I'm here representing Sinergia Animal. Like I mentioned, we work exclusively in the Global South, in both these regions, Southeast Asia and Latin America. We have different programs, so we have corporate campaigns where we are pushing for commitments from very big organizations, very big companies. We also have another very important program where we try to introduce plant-based meals in public institutions, governments, prisons, other institutions. We know that the region has some extra challenges, and I hope I can explain some of these in the panel today. What we've noticed so far is that many of the tactics of the strategy comes from the global north, and we tend to take that into consideration when we go to these countries in the global south. Mostly what we found out is that it's all these tactics and all these actions, they work really well, but they have to be adapted. Because of the context, we have to take a lot of into consideration the local cultures. So this is also very important. Another thing that comes to mind is that we have like a growing population that is eating more meat every day, and we also have to tackle that and find ways to bring them more plant-based options and try to make them understand how this is important. But we've seen that, at least in these regions, it's a lot more effective to work with institutional change than going for specific personal changes. So yeah, and just to bring a bit more of information. So my background is in IT, has nothing to do with animal rights. I believe, as many of you, I got vegan and I was living this very specific life, and then I couldn't turn back and just ignore what was happening. And that's what brought me here. So that's when I joined the campaigns team at MFA Brazil for a while, and then Sinergia Animal later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a really interesting overview of everything that we're going to talk about today. So thank you for contextualizing the conversation. I think my first question to everyone on this panel is really, because we spoke about like how do we build intersectionality, what is true in Kazakhstan is very different from what is true in the Middle East. And then of course, like how are we learning from lessons that have worked in the global north and how can we adapt them in the global south? I think, what are the unique challenges that you all face in your respective regions in your line of work? Anyone can feel free to answer.
Right, I think, I thought about this question before coming here, but after coming here, I think I've changed my mind a wee bit. The foundations, I've been listening to a lot of people talk about what their work is and what their challenges have been. Genuinely, I'm so proud of all the people working on all the issues here in Europe. And the real challenge for India clearly is a lot of the foundations you take for granted in Europe don't exist in India just yet. We have to build those foundations. There's no general understanding of animal cruelty. In fact, despite being very visible in some cases, chickens are handled very brutally, visibly on streets of India. Despite that, the connection is not made that this is suffering, basically. I've seen this happen in a lot of vet markets. When I talk to people, there's a clear dissonance between that even being considered suffering. The other foundations that don't exist is there's a lot of, we can't be even remotely antagonistic to the governments. Even a little bit, there has been a steady pushback against any sort of criticism that's mounting from any of the nonprofits basically in the last decade or so. I think that is one of the biggest challenges we need to overcome. But I think it's also an opportunity because I think we need to build different foundations. We probably can't build the same foundations to doing work. We need to build different foundations. That means that our work will probably look very different in countries like India. And that is something I think everyone needs to kind of keep an eye on, basically, because, that difference doesn't mean that we're not as actively seeking to end suffering, but it just means that that is the most plausible way to move forward.
I would like to agree with my co-panelist. Although in Kazakhstan chicken do not suffer that much because poultry is mostly imported to Kazakhstan, up to 50%. There is a lack of public awareness, not because people are inherently evil or don't care, they just struggle with their own economical challenges and social injustices, and this mindset contributes to weak laws and poor enforcement on animal protection. Another issue is fundings. Funding is hard to find because unlike in the EU, donors are not interested to donate because there is no tax incentives and they don't get tax reliefs whenever they donate. And also the recently introduced list of foreign agents make it hard to attract international funding, and the fear of being added to this list further worsens the situation for us. Another problem is that Kazakhstan is an international wildlife trafficking hub, and such an animal as the steppe turtle, very popular pet in the European Union, is actually illegally collected in the deserts of Kazakhstan and under the disguised as legal exports from Uzbekistan moved to the EU. And there is a perceived lack of influence. People in Kazakhstan are generally open to new ideas, but they feel powerless to create, to change and to believe that their action, and they believe that their action won't have a big impact.
For us, I think we have two different challenges. The first one and the most frustrating one is that we're the first regional organization doing this type of work. So there's no one we can go to see what works or follow their steps. So that means a lot of trial and error. And we need more time to understand what's the best approach in some cases. And unfortunately, at the same time, the other challenge that we have is because we're the first one, we're also the only one. And so there's sometimes many things that we can do, but we're not enough to do it. There's so many low-hanging fruits, but we can't do everything at once. So sometimes the best thing that we think can happen is waking up tomorrow and realizing there's 5 more organizations working in the area. But that's not happening anytime soon, so that means that we're going to have to take care of everything that's happening, and with limited resources. We also have a similar situation with donors who just simply say we're not interested in the Middle East, which of course, wherever you are based, you have probably, if you fundraise, you have gotten rejections. I'm not saying it doesn't happen for other organizations, but it's very frustrating when they don't wonder about whether or not this is okay or not. Like, if you're not interested, okay, what's the reason you're not interested? Is it really like you said, tax incentive? I try not to assume because I don't want to put that intention out there. But at the same time, sometimes it's usually even at conferences. I was very happy when I was asked to speak here, because usually at conferences it's Northern America, Central America, Latin America, Europe, and then we jump to Southeast Asia, and then somehow the Middle East disappears. So it creates this kind of frustration, of course, but it's despite that frustration, of course, we have to continue doing the work and hope that it can create a better impact. Thank you.
So similar to what Seb was saying, we are in my case, we are in many countries. We are currently in 8 countries, mostly in Latin America, also in some Southeast Asian countries. And in many cases, it may look like, oh, we are like a big organization. We have more than 50 people. We are covering so many countries. But we actually, in many cases, when we started, we were the only organization there. Or we had like another organization that was doing not exactly the same work that we did. So we tried to get them on board and involved also with the Open Wing Alliance, so we could work in a coalition and have a bit more pressure towards the companies in many cases. So this is still a challenge, to have new organizations doing similar work and to stay active for longer and not be afraid of the companies, because when you start, you are very small, sometimes you don't have a lot of funding, so how can you go after these giant corporations? Another challenge that we have is we are an organization that is really based in data. We have like a animal welfare department internally. We are very based on science, and for that we need numbers, we need information from the industry, from the government. in many countries, we don't have that information available. And we had a very funny situation, actually, that I remember when I was talking to someone yesterday. It was very hard to find information from Latin America, and the ones that we were finding were not reliable. And what happened is that there was a publication in Japan that was covering the industry as a whole. Someone from the coalition saw it, translated, sent us back, and that's how we got our numbers at some point. So we had to have this joint work. Also, another thing that really is a challenge for us is political instability in many senses. And especially, I don't think you can disconnect Latin America to political instability in many senses. Sometimes the government changes suddenly, and then you have to adapt. And if you want to pass legislation, you have to go after people again. So it's something that happens often. Also, in these regions, we have to compete a lot with media attention, because there is also a lot of things happening all the time, very important things happening, mostly in the political and social side. So how can we still be interesting for the public, for the media to pick what we are doing? Because we need media to get to more people, to get more well-known, also to find more supporters. So yeah, this is something that is definitely a challenge for us. And then the last thing I would say is cultural barriers, because for example, we are in Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Chile, Ecuador, Peru, and then Thailand and Indonesia. All these countries, between them, they are always also very different. So you cannot just start something in a country and then go to the other one. Okay, I already know how to do this, so just keep going. We have to adapt. We have to rely a lot on local people. So at the same time that is challenging, it's also very urgent. So I'm really glad that we're doing that.
Thanks for sharing. I think two things that I heard almost everywhere was that it is somewhat hard to work with the government, except I think in the Middle East, where it seems like there is some scope. And the other thing is that funding is a problem. And I think funding is something we should certainly dedicate more time to. And we've all seen the questions. So we've got a conversation on that. Has anyone worked successfully with the government? What has that been like? So we have these lists of challenges, which are very difficult. Do we have success stories? Is there something that has worked that we'd want to share with everyone over here to see this is something we could try in a newer area once we're starting off? Do you want to go, Seb? Since you simply because you shared that you have success stories,
Okay,
and then we can pass it over to you, Karthik.
sure. So yeah, for some reason in this part of the world, in the Middle East, many of the governments that have more, like basically oil, and therefore a lot of money, care more about their own local residents. And fair enough, of course, like any other government around the world, they have their we can have our fair share of criticism about many things, but they do care about specifically health-related stuff. Saudi Arabia, a year and a half ago, they passed a law to promote the consumption of plant-based products because the population was not eating enough fiber. They also passed the regulation to invest more money in plant-based alternatives. And of course, not because of animal rights, but because in a lot of these countries, most of the animal-based products are imported from outside. So there's a food security part that they have to think about, that it's better to just produce plant-based alternatives locally than import meat from outside. Now, specifically again in Saudi Arabia, we've been working with the Ministry of Health on changing the dietary guidelines, and our team member recently took part in a day-long meeting and workshops that they did, where she talked about the importance of adding more plant-predominant stuff on the dietary guidelines and mentioned that people should not consume as much meat. Now, of course, we'd like to make the guidelines fully vegan, but it just doesn't work that way. And to our surprise, out of nowhere, they sent her like a massive thank you certificate and saying like, you came here and helped us, so we really appreciate everything you're doing. So we're now working on checking the final result. And yeah, this is one like success story that we're still waiting to finalize, but
Yeah.
it just shows that they're quite open to it, and it's been nice.
I think that's really interesting because it also brings in the point of how do we use health or climate or anything else as a point of entry into these conversations. I know the alt protein scene is becoming very big in India, and we have the government now investing money in it. But Karthik, maybe you have like more to say, not just on alt protein, but on generally what are the solutions from a government lens?
Right, right. We've had some critical successes recently, I think, that are definitely worth sharing. The Central Pollution Control Board we've sent them a representation saying this is something that you can do in India. You can send a government department a representation saying, hey, this is what we think you should be doing. Well, they can take that seriously, not take that seriously. But there are mechanisms to get them to take that seriously as well. You can go to court and say, hey, there's a problem, this is a problem, but we've sent them a representation and they're not taking it seriously. So this is a form of activism that a lot of people have tried and have had successes with in the past. So we tried something similar recently, and without even needing to go to dramatic second steps, the Central Pollution Control Board said, hey, this seems very important. Let's work together to regulate this industry. There seems to be no regulation on aquaculture. I predominantly work on fish welfare, and that was a major win for us in many ways. Interestingly enough, our current Chief Justice is vegan, and we've put a petition in front of him, honestly, to see if we could get some rights-based legislation for fish and pigs. I really, really hope he takes an interest and moves that forward, because that petition could introduce stunning for fish into the country, ban gestation crates, and this is all going to be based on a law we have called the Prevention of Cruelty Act, and it would expand the powers of that law significantly and modernize it. If this happens, I think it would be fantastic, and it open a lot of doors for the movement in general. So there are opportunities, weirdly enough, a lot of opportunities exist by kind of mapping it very strategically. You first work with bureaucrats, and then if they're not working with you sufficiently, you kind of map how you could put pressure on them through courts, or how you can put pressure on them through some media work, basically. And all this has to be mapped out very carefully within the confines of not irritating someone too powerful so that your work stops entirely. So it's delicate work, but I think that it shows a lot of promise for sure.
It's very much like when you have arranged marriage or first dates. You just have to be, there's one party who has to be very careful about how they're presenting, because the other party has so much power.
Can I just add a couple of, not exactly successes, but we are in the middle of some processes that were really interesting lately. So the first one is that we have a team that is taking care of the plant-based program, the Nourishing to Power program, and they were recently invited to discuss the new dietary guidelines with the FAO, so we are very happy about it. And the other one, we have just recently, I think it was 2 weeks ago maybe, we have released an investigation in Colombia. And we were able to find 3 people in the Congress who are vegan, all vegan women, very activist. And then, so we got together, we were able to go into the Congress to present the investigation to them, really bring an animal welfare specialist to discuss the needs involved. And in the end, they decided to organize a group and discuss adjustments to the current legislation, maybe add more. And again, we were invited to be a part of that group.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, we don't have much success so far because as a group or as a movement we started not long ago. But I want to highlight one interesting development in Kazakhstan. There is initiated by government shift back to pasture-based farming, and for Kazakhs, animals actually do not belong on concrete floors, they belong to the steppes. So this kind of understanding of animals as kind of roaming together with nomadic Kazakhs coming kind of back, and our president is very committed to the fight with climate change, and the advisor to the president on international environmental cooperation is vegan herself. So we also see a lot of potential in this direction in the collaborating with vegan, with climate and environmental activists in this regard.
Yeah, same. There's a lot of interest in like moving back to traditional ways of doing things. And I think there's legislature that's coming up kind of propelling that shift basically. There's budgets that are coming up. And I think it's very important to kind of keep an eye on those things, carefully nudge them in a direction that helps animals.
Yeah, I think to me what I'm hearing from everyone is that I think if we can, currently I feel a lot of governments view us as like nuisance, like, oh, they've come again with their agenda. And I think if we can start building those relationships, which is a really long run thing, it's not, I think that's also one thing that we're in it for the long run. Then there are maybe opportunities of interacting with governments and seeing if we can get some wins there. I'm going to park the philanthropy issue for a little later in the conversation and come back to another thing that I feel is important. A lot of our focus within the movement right now is just skewed generally to the global north, whether it is in terms of funds, whether it is in terms of organizations, and yet I have this feeling that we'll be having these same conversations that we're having about the global north today, 10 years later, but they will all be true for the global south, because we're increasing our meat product consumption, animal product consumption, and we are the global majority is roughly 70 to 75% of the population. So it'll be a much bigger problem, and we, in some ways, are we displacing the problem versus removing it? And if we are displacing the problem, how do we kind of tackle this challenge of a growing middle class population? And the aspirations of the growing middle class are to consume more meat, because consumption of meat is directly linked to a more affluent lifestyle. So is there a way we can not go through this wave and just simply jump to consuming more plant-based instead of doing the whole we're at low meat consumption, then we get somewhat better economically, then we start high meat consumption, and then we're in the same loop that we see the global north is in right now? And how can we kind of use that to our advantage, the fact that we know that today? Long way of saying, how do we get the middle class to not eat too much meat, and how can we tackle that issue today?
Even though Kazakhstan is often seen as having a meat-heavy culture, we even call ourselves second in meat consumption after wolves. Actually, meat consumption per capita in Kazakhstan is not that high, around 53 kilos per capita, per person, which is significantly lower than other countries like China, 62 kilos per person, Poland, 78, and Germany, 88 kilos per capita. And despite we all in Kazakhstan associate ourselves with meat consumption, many of us grew up with traditions rooted in Slavic fasting and in Korean vegetable-heavy cuisine. If you've heard, in Orthodox Christianity, many Slavics observe. Fasting without animal products takes up a significant part of the year. 222 days where only fish is allowed, but no other animal products, and 195 days where no animal products are consumed at all. And we grew up with understanding that something like this is possible, and such dishes were around us, and it's not surprising to us. It's surprising that it's now called vegan and veganism, but otherwise we lived on it and thrived on it for centuries.
So Aliya, can I ask you a quick follow-up question on that? How do we capitalize on this? We have a way, like most of you don't need to teach people in India how to eat vegan. Like our meals are vegan, and yet we see like a huge rise in animal product consumption. How do we utilize this culture that we have? Our culture does say, when I say our culture, I'm being generic, but generally the global majority, I would want to say, has a collectivist mindset. We don't have an individualistic mindset to say we place the person at the center of everything. And most people, even though cruelty is understood, we don't have to explain to people that animals feel pain. That is understood. We're not questioning sentience. How can we use this information to our advantage?
Yeah, these traditions do provide us with a foundation for our advocacy work, for plant-based diets, and saying that it has been our way of life long before veganism became trendy will help. And I just want to say that with horse meeting and knowing that Kazakhs eat horse sometimes shocks people in Europe. But many farmers now keep horses without eating them. And recently there was a viral, very heartbreaking video of a Kazakh woman singing a lullaby to an orphaned foal, baby horse. And this sparked widespread empathy, showing that the deep cultural care for animals is there. So we can use all these examples to do our advocacy work and promote plant-based solutions. Maybe not modern ones, but we have had before in our culture.
I think that's also, how do we use social media in all of this? Seb, do you want to?
Yeah. I was going to say from our experience at the moment in the Middle East, I'm being ironic here, but it's also not something that we should plan, but the best way to make the Middle East, the middle class not eat as much meat is financial crisis. And I'll give an example about Lebanon. Because of US sanctions and international pressure, there was a very big drop in the value of the local currency, which made the €1 that you just had to multiply it by 2 to get the Lebanese currency. You have to now multiply it by 60. So anything that was imported from outside was ridiculously expensive. Like a carton of soy milk was like €80 or something like that sometimes. And same happened with meat, because there's no meat industry in Lebanon. Everything is imported. So the price of the kilo of meat went up to 300 to 400 euros. As a result, a lot of people switched to eating soy because it's much cheaper. And also just not eating meat in general. It wasn't something that they tried to change. They just like skipped it. Even the Lebanese army stopped serving meat because they didn't have money. But we didn't try to claim that they're a vegetarian army or something. Yes. I think in general, there's this idea of, whatever is more trendy in the West, they try to apply it in the Middle East, and I'm sure in other parts of the world as well. If we look at more financially stable countries like the United Arab Emirates, they do have a rise in consumption of meat and other products. They also at the same time have a massive rise in obesity and diabetes because of it, because we now have the first generation that's exposed to Western diet and indoor living and air conditioning. So the combination, it's just horrible for the health, and this is the result that they get. I think what would be helpful is to also work with worldwide organizations to see, for example, if a certain country is exporting their animals, if there's live export or anything. Organizations on both ends, from the country that's sending and the country that's receiving, can actually work on that. In the case of the Middle East, a very good way that could be worked on, by the way, for example, if we take Australia, they had a massive viral thing that happened because of how the animals were treated on the boats. And they said, oh, these are our animals, and Australian farmers love their animals and they shouldn't be treated this way. And at the same time, for example, once we have the means, could tackle the same thing from the Muslim perspective, which is like, this is not halal. The animals should not be transported in boats for days and days in these conditions, and use a bit of welfare tactics, hopefully. Yeah. I think that can help, because if we cut the source of the products and they're not locally produced, then that helps. Another thing that helps the middle class, at least again in the case of Lebanon, was when the financial crisis started, no one could afford vegan cheese or vegan milk. So a lot of local companies started opening up that were making one of better vegan cheese than I've had in Europe than the States. And the best thing about it was healthy.
It was healthy.
Because they use very simple ingredients. So yeah, that's another option as well.
So there are options other than a financial crisis that we can go for.
Hopefully, yes.
Hopefully.
In our case, we believe more in institutional change, more globally speaking, instead of going for the individual. We focus a lot on education, like this program that I mentioned, that we go to schools, we go to even governments. When we have these sessions inside the schools, we also involve everyone that is in that environment. So we get the children involved. They get also some cooking classes. They learn how to make vegan food, and then they can also take this back to their homes when they get back to their parents. So we've seen some change lately. This program has started mostly first in Colombia, then in Argentina. Now we are also seeing more momentum in Indonesia. Currently we have around 60 commitments and more than 160 institutions that are involved. So this is something, especially considering the amount of plant-based meals that they will be replacing.
Yeah.
Only from the commitments that we had last year, I think it's already more than 1 million meals replaced. So that's quite important. And when it comes to Argentina, for us that was a bit surprising. We didn't know if the program would work in the first place, because I don't know how familiar you are with Argentina, but there's a lot of this gaucho culture that evolved around meat. So people recognize themselves culturally around meat.
Yeah.
But it's been doing quite well. So I would say mostly education, regulations whenever possible, and making the product, if we can call it this way, affordable, easy to use. It has to look good, has to have a good name. Someone mentioned yesterday, like the vegan blog. I don't think it works. So we have to go with options that people would be willing to get home. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd really go big on the health stuff, honestly. It's very weird to me that India is one of the largest milk producers in the world, but has 60% population that's lactose intolerant. And this should be a bigger problem than what the country is recognizing right now, right? We should be labeling milk as an allergen. We should be advertising milk as an allergen a lot more, which we aren't doing. I think it's an opportunity that's kind of being missed at the moment by, because we don't really think about India-specific approaches. A lot of the advocates in the movement just copy-paste some of the stuff. I mean, in some cases, forced to copy-paste some of the stuff. The reason why I think about this is because you've asked about the middle class, and a lot of what the middle class purchases, milk is seeping into that. They're putting more clarified butter in things. There's more cheese consumption in India. All this is spiking in India, but there's a very clear solution here. I mean, if we increase awareness around lactose intolerance and advocate for more clarity about indicating that milk is an allergen, I think we could make a lot of difference, honestly. And that's the sort of thinking that's needed. I'm not just thinking about this one thing, but I think the way to really get the middle class to change would be to not see meat as a healthy option at all. In fact, in our country, it's not a healthy option. Knowing what I know, working with fish farmers, they don't eat their own fish. None of them do. We've had at least, 5 out of 10 farmers we talk to say this, that, oh yeah, we put too many crazy things in there to be eating the fish we grow, basically, right? It is not really a healthy option. The way these animals are being raised could have major health implications because of the number of antibiotics that are used in their production. And I think the middle class is increasingly health conscious. The same trend that indicates that middle class consumption of meat is increasing also indicates that their health consciousness is also on the increase. I think we need to target the right institutions and have plant-based diets promoted through them. Have the conception of animal welfare promoted through them as well. I think that would be an important thing to achieve in the interim, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I would challenge you a little bit on that because I think we have Amul, which is the largest dairy conglomerate in all of the world, and they actively pursue besides saying that we should be putting milk forward as an allergen, we've actually introduced and led to the growth of the white revolution. So we actually spread it all across the country. And how do we I think that's something to think about given the scale of the challenge with dairy. But I do agree that I think there is something for us to do with health and with other intersectional movements. Just
to get to that, I think, fighting a mole, if the animal movement is the only thing fighting a mole or any organization like that, I think it's going to be super difficult to get anywhere.
Yeah.
I think we'd need to work on things like that as a coalition with other powerful forces. If we work with doctors, for instance, they have a lot more credibility in the public eye than the animal movement does at the moment. We work with environmentalists, we work with doctors, we pretty much work with folks who can advocate this strongly by forming coalitions. Otherwise, these industries are too powerful to tackle just on our own.
I agree. And I think coming to one of the other things that you shared, and again, the question is open to everyone on the panel. How can international organizations who have been around for a longer time, how do we have a relationship with them wherein we are not maybe following their strategy exactly as is in our regions? But what is it that it also seems a little not the best idea to not learn anything from them? That movement is about 40 years older than a very young and growing movement. So what is it that we can learn from international organizations, and what can we tell international organizations, and how can they amplify the work that we want to do in our regions?
I want to start with what won't work. Protesting won't work, because in Kazakhstan, even single person protests have to be authorized by municipality, city administration, and if without permit, then this person would face either a fine or an arrest up to 20 days. And such a fine or arrest even can be taken as a preventive measure even before the protest took place. And this means the tactics should be different, maybe more like in Vietnam or Singapore or other countries who had succeeded to some extent in animal protection or plant-based alternatives. We have had success working with Anima International. They supported us with our 2 vegan festivals and 1 animal rights conference. For us to come to such conferences like this is a privilege, and tickets are expensive. It's hard to get a visa. Even online participation is costly for most activists in Kazakhstan. So what would be nice is to have accessible, free, localized courses for vegan activists and animal protection activists back in Kazakhstan, so that they can teach themselves through these courses. And in general, content generation in local languages would help a lot with the help of international organizations.
Thank you. Seb, Lucia?
In terms of getting support from international organizations, I think if you know someone who would be willing to donate for the Global South, get in touch, because we always have ideas, we always have plans and projects, so funding is always welcomed. Another thing, if you are like an expert in something, you could join our advisory board. We are also always looking for more people to get involved. Was thinking more in terms of like the culture that what Aliya was mentioning. I mentioned initially too, so we noticed that most of the tactics also work for the Global South, but we have to adjust many things.
Yeah.
We work very closely with local lawyers. When we talk about this with organizations from the Global North, we notice that for them it's kind of funny. For example, we had to organize a protest in Amsterdam, I think it was last year. So we got in touch with a lawyer from the country, and he said that most of our questions were useless. Because we were asking like, oh, how many people can we get to the street? What can we say? What shouldn't we say? What kind of messaging can we add to that? Should we worry about some specific words? Because mostly in the Global South, you cannot name cruelty, for example. You cannot use that word because it's legally classified, so you shouldn't use it. Otherwise, it's more probable that you'll get sued. And it's not the case for our countries. We need these local lawyers working with us, checking everything that we do, letting us know how safe or not it is. Most of the times we have to send permits, like notify the authorities, mostly police, sometimes even like the fire department, depending on the action. And if they don't say anything, then we can go, but we have to be careful, of course. But they also can just reach out to us and say like, hey, you cannot do this. This has happened to us in Thailand, so we wanted to protest on a very big square. The team was organizing. It was an action that was mostly for focusing on one big company from the country. So we are not sure if that was the main reason, but they said, no, you cannot protest. For us, your protest is linked to political activism, and we are not going to allow that on that specific square because it's the main square from the city. It was in Bangkok. So we organized an event in Chiang Mai, and we were afraid that no one would come because for the Thai culture specifically, dealing with authority, with a hierarchy, contesting things, it's not that easy as it is in other regions. So we were afraid that no one would go, that people would just get too afraid or not want to get into that. So some people dropped off. They just didn't join. Most people did. And the fun part is that they felt really safe because they knew that we were really taking care of them during the whole process. The police came to talk to the team. So that was the moment where we got a bit more worried. Okay, are we going to be removed from the place? Are we going to be expelled from the city? We're never coming here again. And they actually were praising us, hey, we didn't know that your protest was so peaceful. You have the right to be here. It's so nice that you are doing something about something that you believe in. So we also get these surprises when we are doing the work, but we need this cultural context. We need the local people. So that's why I mentioned earlier, we really rely on local teams. We may bring some new strategy to them, but they are the ones who are going to assess it and let us know if it makes sense, if it has to be adapted, if we are getting crazy and it's not going to work. So another example, for Asia, it's a bit harder to use real images from investigations, even though we have a lot. So we paired with a cartoonist to create some pieces for us, and now the public gets a lot more involved because they find it cute, it's more aligned to the type of media that they see in the region.
Right. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, for us, we really had to realize that unfortunately there's not much that we can learn and adapt from other organizations in other areas of the world, especially Western organizations, just because of the cultural differences and sometimes even political situations depending on the countries. And the thing that we realized was really important is not to do any type of activism or outreach in the Middle East the way we know it worked in the West or in the Global North. And the reason for that is also the culture perspectives that there are. At the moment, what we're working on with Animatrix is prepare a big research on human-animal relations in the Middle East in several countries to really understand what people think towards other animals, what shapes their habits, how much culture or religion plays a role in their habits, and that would help us actually understand what are the best means that we can use instead of just copying from somewhere else.
Right.
I think that we can draw a lot of inspiration from the work that has happened. It really tells us that change is possible, right? How this change happens, we probably have to figure this out on our own, depending on the context we're in. But I think we can draw a lot of that confidence from what has happened before. We can see public opinion shifting now, and we can think about how public opinion would be, say, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and make plans for that accordingly. But having said that, I think working at FWI, it's very clear to me that when we kind of really build a system with ideas from our Western colleagues and ideas from our Indian colleagues, those systems tend to be the strongest, because I think the experiences of both groups are kind of brought in, and when they meet in the middle, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but when they meet in the middle, I think our strongest programs have come out of that kind of coalition, basically, where both sides have like really carefully carved out a way to move forward. I think, optimism, inspiration, a lot of those things can be drawn. I mean, I'm just genuinely so happy that we're making all this progress, and that inspires me to kind of push for progress where I am, even though it's difficult. But I think it's always the case that there's a few extra steps when we're trying to do the same thing, right? With corporate outreach, for instance, we need to let the corporations get big enough to actually influence them potentially, right? In some cases they might be, in some cases they probably need to grow. In terms of something as simple as doing a protest, there are probably 9 extra steps to do a protest, basically. So it's always worth kind of, even in that kind of synergy building, there's always kind of remembering that, okay, we need to take this cautionary step, basically.
Yeah, I think that's all true. I agree with a lot of the things that were said. I also think we don't have any repository of case studies that have worked in our own regions, like what has worked in Brazil, we make case studies and we start kind of sharing that, because there may be more similarity, I feel, not based on data, between countries in the global south. And we can utilize those strategies maybe. So maybe what works in Brazil may also work in India to some extent. And it'll be 4 different steps and not 9. Maybe that is one thing that we can do.
Just one thing that I remembered. Just someone was telling me earlier that in the US, for a lot of the cage-free work, there's organizations are like specializing very specifically. One does the good cop work, one does the bad cop work, and kind of successfully dividing that work among each other. I think that would be a great thing if it happened in India, honestly. I think that would be phenomenal for India.
Yes, I think movement building is going to be really important, and I think we did have it at one point of time, but maybe it's less developed now. Before I jump to the panel, I'm going to ask to the audience, I'm going to ask one last question to everyone on the panel, and maybe we are quicker with our reactions because we've got 20 minutes on the panel. All of the work that we're saying, I think there's one big hurdle that we've touched but not fully spoken about, which is philanthropy. How do you think philanthropy can help, besides saying, yes, give us more money, which I think I fully understand. What role do you think philanthropy can play in setting up organizations for success in circumstances that are very different from the ones that maybe many philanthropies are used to? How can we also, I was also thinking about this. We have so many billionaires in India, in the Middle East. How can we start having a culture of donations within our, we almost rely on donations to be some US and, maybe some parts of Europe and UK. How do we cultivate those, that way of kind of raising funds so that we're more internally reliable? And how do we make people feel comfortable with failing? We don't have the roadmap that we have in the developed world right now. How do we convince people to take chances, see what hit different things on the wall and see what sticks for a bit. Or any other thoughts on philanthropy and how can they help grow the movement in the Global South?
Okay, I can share some things. So the first thing is, I think people in general have to understand that, of course, the progress will be slower. And also for the reasons that Karthik was saying, so if we have more steps, it will take longer naturally. The research is not so easy, so there are many other things that we'll have to find out or have like a better context to be able to actually have results. The results are happening, and they will happen. It will get better with time, but maybe in the beginning, people will need more support. So another thing that I thought is that, for example, when we start an organization, we may get funding for 1 year. But then how can we continue the work? So if we could have funding for more time,
3
if we know
years.
that it's going to keep going, we would be safer to actually have like long-term plans and be able to have more team members, for example. So this is also very important. Also trusting the organizations that they are the ones who know the context and know what will work, and not trying to like suggest a better way for going forward. For now, in our case, the donors have been very understanding and supportive when we share that we have to make some changes in the plans or that we have other ideas. Another thing is that like building reserves for us, it's very important, because in the political context that we have, in the social context, our currencies, they have a lot of fluctuation. This is happening a lot in Latin America lately as well. So if we can build reserves, if we can also focus on other areas that are not just like effective altruism per se. Right. For example, we have to have people for people in operations, even like legal support, movement building also, because I don't think we talk about this a lot. We normally focus more on campaign results and other specific numbers. And having this this mindset that it's going to progress, but we need to have these other support areas to be able to actually go for the bigger win.
Thank you. I think that's great, yeah.
So I think for us, how philanthropy can help, and of course, other than just helping out financially directly, is, as you said, really just accept the fact that the person representing their work to you knows much better what works there, and just accept that as a fact, unless you have a good argument against it. I cannot tell you the amount of times that we were rejected because we were not doing welfare work. Other than the fact that most Middle Eastern countries don't have farms, how are we going to do welfare work? The ones that do have farms, I can very easily pass laws. We can claim them victory and high-five each other. Doesn't necessarily mean anything is going to happen. So then that would be wasting our time and a person's money to achieve nothing but an email that says we got this law change. So it would be very helpful for people to just accept that in some cases this is not a thing. And it's also, of course, a lot of the funding in the movement comes from effective altruism, and it's very much influenced by utilitarian ideas. And in some cases, it's just easier to have strictly animal rights and vegan-based ideas, and that can work as well. And we have a very good example in Lebanon. We now have a fully vegan hospital for health, environmental, ethical, and pandemic prevention reasons. You go in and it has posters everywhere about animal rights and plant-based eating and the environment. So it wasn't even a strictly health thing. So if we had just approached that, for example, as a welfare thing again, we would have just claimed a smaller victory.
Yeah.
And I think it would just help the movement a lot if we, whoever is interested, to show more that no, we will not change our approach because we know what works better, and we can show you the results of that as well. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think a lot of people in this room can help, actually. I think the biggest success we had at FWI with funding has been because, the efforts that we put on the ground, right? Whatever works on the ground, whatever's likely, the ideas that are likely to work in a space like India are effectively translated to the donor community. I think a lot of people, you're asking, I mean, I think this is a connection between your earlier question and this question, really. I think this is a real opportunity to cooperate, basically, because you guys know what a lot of the Western donors need to understand. You have relationships with them, and I think it is important to help organizations in the developing world to kind of help translate what their success is. I mean, help them create their vision and help translate that vision to a lot of the donor community. A lot more literacy needs to be created around this. I think that would be super helpful to have. I have a lot of personal experience with this working out, honestly speaking, and I think, yeah, genuinely, all of you in this room, I think, can help with some of this.
You asked Shweta how to make local billionaires interested in
yes.
supporting animal welfare and veganism. If we do have billionaires in Kazakhstan too, and we should show them that there is a strong social dimension in animal welfare and veganism, and if they ever consider to support or to finance only through this, to show that plant-based alternatives provide jobs, make communities more resilient, also climate resilient, and so on, to show that it helps our society socially and make it as
Thank you for sharing that. I think the One Health approach is like a really interesting way to go. I do think, Seb, like the point that you were saying, that yes, there is a lot more funding for welfare campaigns than there is for rights-based campaigns and advocacy. And I feel like the movement does this thing where it overcorrects itself, where for a while we only did outreach, and then we were like, this works and this is amazing. And then we stopped in about 2013, 14, and now we only do welfare, and hopefully we will reach full circle and realize that actually both need to happen, and institutional change and public change have to go together if we want to see long-lasting change. And I think how can we get philanthropies to do more plant-based work is a larger question which I have no answers to. But that does bring us to the live questions from the audience section. And I think the first question that we have is kind of answered, but I'm still going to throw it out to see if there is any new thought that comes up. What do we think, what can the Western animal movement do to better support pro-animal work in the Global South? What can we expect the movement itself to do?
I think you guys are the most sympathetic component in all this. I think it's, as I was saying, I think it's easier to reach out to one of you before we reach out to a donor potentially. I mean, I'm just visualizing how this could happen basically, right? I think that is one way in which you could help. Also, to answer another question you had earlier, I think our billionaires are very indisciplined in how they do charity in general. They don't, building that discipline is something that I think could come from a lot of how Western organizations have kind of built, I'm thinking about the EA space building kind of this connection with billionaires where they show, okay, this is the kind of charity you need to be donating to. These are the questions you need to be asking. Do not donate blindly to whatever. And I think bringing that discipline and advocacy and helping us bring that discipline potentially could really help, because there's a lot of money in India. In fact, most big corporations are required to give a big chunk of the money away, but they give it out in such indisciplined and weird ways where impact is far from the thing that they're expecting to happen, basically. But changing that dynamic, helping us change that dynamic would be one thing. Also kind of, helping us kind of make our communication more effective. I think that those two things would be, I think, great first steps. There's probably a lot more.
Thanks.
I would like to add that animal welfare activists from Western countries can help a lot by pressuring their companies, like for example, Tyson Foods wanted to build a large meat processing facility in Kazakhstan 2 years ago, and they had to freeze this project because of the war, but not because their activists from the US pressured them not to do this. We rely in Kazakhstan a lot on imported meat, on imported technologies, and also for meat production, meat processing, and so on. So, or, for example, live export from Germany going on every year to Kazakhstan. If activists in Germany are more curious about how it's going on and what is happening there on live trucks, this would be very helpful, and we are ready and open to work in collaboration on this.
Thank you.
As our name says, like Sinergia, we work really with synergies, with coalitions, so collaborating more would be amazing. We have been doing this in the past days in the conference, like talking, discussing, seeing how we can help each other. Sometimes we have the same targets, or we have similar targets, so we can teach each other things. And also, when it comes to very big corporations, they are mostly like headquartered in the north, but they have sometimes they import from the south, or they have some branches in the area. So having some support when we are going for commitments would be very good as well. If you have connections, help us get connected to important people who you think could be beneficial to us as well. Could be experts, not only donors. We tend to think of donors in the first place, but could also be like a scientist, someone who is doing specific work in a region that we can also get knowledge from. Yeah, and if you are like if you would like to volunteer in an area, if you are like a qualified volunteer, you would like to do something. We have been approached by some people lately, people who work exactly at these big corporations. They are vegan and they want to do something for the movement. So we always have something, we always need more people, so it's another way to get involved.
I'll quickly say one way that you can help us is help us reach Arab and Middle Eastern populations in your countries. We offer a free Arabic translation service at Middle East Vegan Society to help organizations worldwide also make sure that the work that they're creating, whether it's articles or blogs or information and research, we want to help them reach people in their countries who actually prefer reading it in Arabic. So we've done website translations to for many organizations worldwide, or just translating their work and the research they've done to help them fill that gap that's missing at the moment.
Thanks for sharing. I think what would be interesting is if we actually write some of this stuff down and see what is it that we can really get Western organizations to do? Where is it that people can help us, whether it's connections, whether it's, I also heard like if we have people operations, legal support, maybe we can set up like a hub that just does operations and legal stuff and helps all other organizations. Maybe that is like an idea that we'd want to explore after this panel. This is another really interesting question with regards to the Global South. Does the fact that human suffering is more prevalent in the Global South than it is in the Global North make it difficult to generate concern about animal farming? I have got this question so many times when I have been on the streets, which is that why don't you work for cancer? Kids are dying. There is lack of education. Why are you doing this? Like there is a general feeling of, like there is so much that's going on and why are you choosing to focus on this issue? Do you think that makes it harder to generate concern about animal suffering?
Yes, unfortunately. It's the most common thing that anyone wants to oppose veganism with, at least in Lebanon, is, oh, an hour away, kids are dying and you're talking about animals. Which sounds like a good argument, but it's really not, given that unless I'm doing something 3 times a day to contribute to that child dying, I don't see the point in you mentioning it. Unfortunately, it's something that people say, but it's not that big, like, of a major issue. In fact, veganism is not even seen as it's still seen as this new thing that's coming up, and not necessarily in a negative way. So when we have TV interviews, it's never anything close to what you get with Piers Morgan when you talk about veganism. It's much more like, oh, tell us more about this, and people call and ask questions about nutrition. It's barely any arguments there. it's, yeah, unfortunately the human rights part or human suffering part does kind of create an obstacle, because you do have to be to a certain extent comfortable where you are in your life.
Yeah.
It is a privilege to have to think about what else you can do for others. Yeah.
And it's a real opportunity, I feel, to show this as a human rights issue. It is a human rights issue. It is a health issue. I think one thing about food systems is you could practically think of any problem that we have in our society today, whether that's gender, race, hunger, non-communicable diseases, and everything is linked to our broken food system. And I think maybe we as animal activists can also do more and say, yes, like cancer is important, and one of the reasons why you're getting cancer and diabetes and many other issues is because of what we're putting inside our bodies, is what I sense. Okay, I'm gonna ask the last question. I think we're at time. It's 1:28, right? 5. Okay. This is likely, I guess it's a little controversial, but I'm going to read it. An impression I've seen from some advocates in the Global South is that the situation in these countries is too complex and nuanced for Western activists to advise or support on. And at times, Western activists can also face hostility for trying to offer assistance to people in the Global South. So what is your take on that topic? And do you think that this reason could possibly be another reason that is influencing the lack of funding that we have right now? So thoughts? Let's end on a high.
I'll start at the end of the question.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the grants that we received our first year, when they sent an email, they said, we're gonna help you out with a small grant and it's gonna be like this. However, we were wondering how it's perceived from us, from the other side of the world, from the global north, to send you money. Is there any way like you can get it like locally or regionally? And I mean, if there was, we wouldn't be asking you all for help. I swear we would rather just get it easier and without having to travel to the other side of the world for a meeting, probably from Eventory or Hoover. And the other question regarding Western activists facing hostility because they're trying to give advice or helping or anything, in my opinion, if someone from the Global South is open to working with you and is asking you questions or guidance, why is anyone else interfering and saying, oh, you shouldn't interfere? It's like, it's literally collaboration and support. I mean, it's called the animal rights movement.
Yeah.
You know, we shouldn't be just individuals like, oh, well, if the person says something that doesn't apply to you, just say, oh, well, that one doesn't apply, and you move on. But everything else, like, we're here to help each other out. Yeah.
I think, but if that is not the feeling that happens, like I understand what you're saying, but if that's not the experience that people are having, is one where there is maybe like this now reticence to help because the whole global North-South conversation has become so active that you have to be very careful before you say things, which I'm all for. I'm not saying you should not be careful. But is there a way to kind of break down these barriers? And the second question, do you think, given that these barriers exist, it is actually limiting our funding now?
You know, I think both sides need to be open to feedback.
Yeah.
You know, instead of looking at it as someone lashing out, understand where the frustration's coming from. I think often I find it very difficult to communicate my ideas, basically. It's not easy. You know, English is not my first language. Even though I speak it really well, I do have communication issues. The way I use the language, the way I think is very different from the way a Westerner would think, basically. And therein, there would be some issues bubbling up from time to time. Happens often, but I think patience, being open to feedback is extremely important. There are lots of animals living in this part of the world. And it's only looking like it's going to grow. And there's so much work that needs to be done. I think this is the last thing that we should let sap away any energy from that. I think being, you know, I'd just, from both sides, develop a thick skin, be open to feedback, and get moving on finding solutions, honestly speaking. Because we need you, you need us. There's just no doubt about it.
And the animals need us.
And the animals need both of us.
We are open in Kazakhstan. You can approach us. We are ready for your advice. But depends on who your messenger is, because now Kazakhstan, after the war, war of Russia against Ukraine, is going through another nation reshaping process. So if it's through the Russian language, might be a problem. If it's through the English language, would be better accepted. Yeah. And so far, no other activist group or organization approached us except for Anima International, and I want to praise Anima International for this, for being so respectful. They didn't dictate us what to do. We did it all together in collaboration. Yeah. And Dmitry Koretsky from Anima International was with us all this time, and thanks to him, 2 vegan festivals and 1 animal protection conference happened in Kazakhstan. And before this conference, I haven't seen anybody from Anima International but him, so thank you very much. And we are open. Just be careful with who your messengers or your mediators would be in this case. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and my experience, actually the experience that I have from the local teams is that advice and feedback is always welcome. Yeah. I've never seen any kind of issue in this sense. Of course, communication issues, I believe we have a lot, and I think we'll keep having. Even if it is like the same language, we still have some communication issues. So imagine having people who are so different, who come from different perspectives, from different context scenarios. So I think it's natural that we have these situations. But yeah, what I've seen, and I think we are very lucky because Sinergia was founded in 2017. And right after we joined some coalitions, so we are part of the WA. And inside of that, we have access to many resources. We talk to people from all the places possible where we have groups working there. We have had some mentorship programs, and I've had people from my teams in Indonesia and in Colombia specifically who have gone through these mentorship programs. They got mentorship from people in France, in Sweden, and it was very helpful. Because we have to have this wisdom, this knowledge of, okay, I'm going to get some ideas. I'm not just going to replicate, but we have this open collaboration. Like, hey, I think what you've done is very nice. Can you teach me how you did it? What were the challenges? And then we adapt, we speak, we have these exchanges. And so far, people have been very open to hearing back from us as well. So I'm glad that we didn't get into that.
Thank you. All right, I think that was interesting. I think that was a good answer. We're on time. Can I request everyone to give 1 sentence of a closing statement from all of you, just like 1 sentence, and then we can just close the panel, or 1 word, 1 sentence, whatever you want to go with.
Can it be unrelated to what we're talking about?
Sure. Yeah.
I just want to say, were you doing all of this? That's so impressive, right? Sorry. Yes. Because at one point I looked and I saw you doing something, and I was like, what is she doing, you know? And then I saw something moving here, and I realized the circles were getting created, and I was like, wow, that is really impressive. So thank you for that. That's nice.
I would like to thank you all for accepting me on this panel. It's my first time I speak on behalf of my group and at the Animal Rights Conference internationally. So thank you very much.
I also want to thank everyone who's here, who's at the conference. I love all of you for doing what you're doing. Thank you so much for creating this movement, fueling this movement, and letting me be a part of it.
And thank you also for staying until the very end.
Yes, thank you.
We are very glad that we have people who are really interested in the global south and how you can support and how we can get involved. I think we have to unite more as a movement, so that's where we start. Thank you. Thank you.
On that note, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone. We have more sessions coming up. We're all here till tomorrow. If there are any more questions, please feel free to approach any of us today or on tomorrow's networking brunch. And please do remember to rate this talk within the app. And if there's anything we can do differently or do more of, we'd be happy to do that. And my last sentence was, there's a book called The Culture Map. I would request everyone to read it. I think it'll help us a long way to kind of get along with each other. So thank you for having us, and thank you to CARE for helping us organizing this. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Shweta.
Thank you.